I'm Marilyn Levin, and I'm one of the two co-coordinators and a founder of UNAC. And I'm delighted to see you. So welcome back. I'm sure that you all had a wonderful, enjoying evening last night in dynamic, exciting nightlife of Richmond, but that you're eager and ready to go today and inspired by the energy and passion that we had presented all weekend. And we want you to, of course, leave with renewed determination to carry forward and bring the power to the people. The first thing I'd like to say is that we are changing the schedule. You may have noticed that the schedule was a little unrealistic. So what we're doing is making this the last plenary panel of the conference. And this is following the last one. This one is building a more powerful movement for justice and peace. And instead of breakout sessions, what we're proposing is having a broad discussion with all of you about where do we go forward, how do we go forward, what actions can we take, and how can we build UNAC, which is part and parcel of how we go forward. And to have that discussion, we also, to give a frame, the leadership of UNAC is going to distribute a proposal of action, our principles and our main beliefs in how we can go forward, and that we're going to ask you to comment on and support. Then after that, we will break for lunch, return here. Hopefully most of you will then be able to hear about the Shockoe Bottom burial ground and to take that march there. I'm told it's less than a mile. So it should be pretty good, and there'll be a van also for people who can't walk that distance. And we hope that that'll be a wonderful, rousing end to a wonderful conference. Okay, I've been asked to make a few remarks about the history of UNAC, and I'm doing this before the panel, and then we're going right into the panel. Following 9/11, the government starting the disastrous years of unending wars and never-ending repression, there was an upsurge of anti-war action with major demonstrations, particularly to stop the invasion of Iraq over the non-existent weapons of mass destruction. However, the movement was sharply divided then, and the National Assembly to End Iraq and Afghanistan Wars and Occupations was formed as the forerunner to UNAC to fill the void of calling for unity and independence and democracy and mass actions as the center of the movement. Unfortunately, the fight-back energy of the anti-war movement was diverted into the 2008 Obama elections, and we know how electing the peace candidate worked out. So elections, instead of relying on the power of mass action of thousands in the streets, and the growing anti-war movement was cut short, but the need, of course, is ever greater. UNAC was formed at a large conference of 800 people in 2010, held in Albany, with the same goals of responding to the same crisis of a failing empire, desperate to control world resources and maintain its power. At that time, unconditional support for the Palestinian people, struggle for ending occupation, apartheid, and Zionist colonial control was controversial for the mainstream peace movements. But UNAC took a principled stand against Zionism and the U.S. backing, its U.S. backing, and calling for an end to all U.S. aid to Israel. We're very proud of that because although we lost some people, we gained so much, and that was a real sea change in the struggle for Palestine's freedom. Since then, we've had conferences and we've had actions and we've taken stands on every important issue and struggle that has come forward. And there are many, as you know. The other thing that we've been instrumental in is helping form Muslims for Peace, and from this conference support the Black Alliance for Peace is coming forth. And these are very exciting developments. We're really thrilled. As a result of UNAC's unflagging stance against U.S. imperialism and our continued efforts to build a coalition that is broad, independent, unified, and democratic, UNAC is now the largest and most visible anti-war and social justice coalition in the United States today. Historically, all major struggles for fundamental change have been achieved through mass mobilizations, and we do stress mass actions as our most important tactic, of course not the only one, to organize, to demonstrate our collective might, and to scare the hell out of the powers in Washington, that the power of the people will never be defeated. We need to show the world that even in the belly of the beast, we continue to struggle for all, and we will be victorious. We're going to, in the discussion, talk about UNAC's principles of unity. I'll mention the principles right now, and this very important, I would urge you to read this very important document that's on the table. By the way, there are literature tables, including one for UNAC in the next room, and if you haven't been there, please go. The UNAC's principles of unity are no to imperialist war, intervention, blockades, sanctions, and internal interference. Support for the right of oppressed peoples to self-determination. Promotion of mass mobilizations as the major, but not only, means of resistance. Independence from the major capitalist parties, and internal democracy and decision-making. And we see our main effort as the word coalition means bringing together all kinds of groups with a common, some unifying principles and a common goal. And because our enemy is the same in all of these issues that we've been talking about, the only way to win is to bring people together and to be a unified coalition that integrates and interconnects all of these issues that we've been talking about, because they are totally intertwined, and a victory for one is a victory for all, and an attack on one is an attack on all, and we only can go forward as a unified collective group and power. Thank you. Is Ajamu here?
Yeah.
No.
Halfway.
Oh, okay.
Partly here, yeah.
Okay, I didn't see you. You're going to go first, and I'd like to introduce Ajamu Baraka. I think you all know him. He was the Green Party vice presidential candidate in 2016, and I'm sorry to say he did not win, but he is the founder of a new formation which will win, Black Alliance for Peace. Ajamu.
Thank you so much. I'm going to, I'm glad that we are making a slight adjustment to the schedule that would allow us to engage in a more, I think, deeper conversation around which way to go. My remarks then, I think, will help to set that stage in the sense that the one message that I wanted to get across this morning was that we need to remind ourselves that, you know, we have to be grounded in the understanding of the specific historical conditions that we find ourselves. We know that we have been involved in trying to revive an anti-war movement here in this country. We know that we have suffered some reversals over the last 8 years, primarily as a consequence of the ideological inroads made by the bourgeoisie, utilizing one of its most effective weapons of confusion, and that was Barack Obama. So what we have to do is to remind ourselves that now we're in a different period. And we have to do that because I find that in discussing with folks that because of the difficulties of the last 8 years, because of the inability to stop the aggressive moves on the part of the U.S. state in invading Iraq and Afghanistan and galvanizing support for the subversion in Syria, and ignoring the destabilization and war that the U.S. has encouraged one of its vassal states, the Saudis, to engage in Yemen, that there appears to be some doubts among some of us whether or not we can in fact build a effective anti-war movement here in this country. I say that we have to remind ourselves of being grounded in the conditions, because the conditions today are different. That we have I think a marvelous opportunity. If we believe in our ability, we have a marvelous opportunity now to really revive this anti-war movement here in this country. We have to understand that and see that there among many sectors of the population a war exhaustion, that people really are getting tired of the constant war and constant threats of war. We see that there is a disconnect between the positions of the elite and the people when it comes to these conflicts. And you can look at a couple of examples in the popular discourse that was being advanced by the Obama administration around the justifications for the U.S. attack in Syria. There was a clear disconnect between his positions and the American people, who had some doubts and who did not seem to be in a very strong majority supporting that attack. And we see the same thing that happened with the diversionary attacks by the Trump administration. It's not dramatic, but you can see that there is a slippage in terms of this sort of lockstep support for American aggression among the people in this country. So we have to capitalize on that. We have to identify the sectors of the population that we can in fact influence. Now I say that because when we do that, we have to identify the messengers, the ones that can help in that process of trying to shift public opinion even more strongly against war, against intervention, against militarism, and in support of those elements that are struggling against state repression domestically. And what that means is that we have to identify those organizers, those activists who are involved in social justice work, and begin to try to agitate among those elements who have bases in the community, and to argue that whatever issues you may be involved in, right now we need for you to consider shifting some degree of focus and support to the anti-war position. And that's important because in these new conditions, we see that the state is vulnerable. We know that because of the legitimation crisis that the state is facing, that it can no longer hold the support of the people ideologically, that now it is becoming more and more dependent on using force and aggression, repression, both domestically and internationally. So if we are able to sharpen that contradiction by making it very difficult for the state to, in fact, utilize those instruments, then we are, in fact, contributing to creating the revolutionary conditions we have to create in order to bring about the fundamental change that most of us in this room are committed to. So we have to identify those activists. We have to begin to become more visible. It's important that we have an expanded coalition. We have to aggressively attempt to expand that coalition. We have to engage people in conversations around why the coalition has to expand. We have to consider contact and struggle with some elements that may not always appear to be the usual suspects, but there are elements in this country that may not share all the principles of UNAC, but they are concerned with the continued belligerence and aggression on the part of the American state. We need to engage those forces. So we have, very quickly, we have organizational, ideological, and programmatic challenges that we can address. We have to expand the coalition. We have to consider connecting up with those elements that we don't always have deep connections to, like, for example, elements of various churches, people who have a moral stance against war and aggression. We have to expand our connections with people of color, in particular with African Americans and with Latinos. This is a time to, in fact, do that, because we know that when the U.S. engages in these conflicts, that there are disproportionate sectors of the population that suffer the most from this, the ones who are the most dependent on this military apparatus just to survive. Ideologically, we've got to be very bold and aggressive in articulating the principles of UNAC. We have to do that in very creative ways. We have to attempt to try to get op-eds, even in the bourgeois press. We have to really become more visible and aggressive in getting our arguments and agitation in the independent press, the left press. We have to be even more visible and aggressive in developing clear statements on various topics that can be used by activists here in the country. Programmatically, we have to, I think, with all of the issues we could focus in on, we have some issues that we can focus in on that will allow us to advance our organizing and agitational work. We have to be upfront and clear about our opposition to the expanding military budget. We believe that with this obscene request on the part of the Trump administration to expand the budget by $54 billion, the capitulation of the Democrats during the budget reconciliation process, where they already gave $15 billion, if we can begin to articulate how we can use those resources instead of support for the military machine, I think we can make some ideological inroads. I take the position, and the Black Alliance for Peace is taking the position, not only are we going to oppose those increases, we're agitating for at least a 50% cut in the military budget. And lastly, since my time is up, we have to really make sure that we stand in a principled and forthright way in opposing any expansion of the U.S. presence in Syria. It is illegal, it is immoral, and we have, I think, we are uniquely positioned to take an oppositional position on the expansion of the U.S. in Syria, and we know they're going to attempt to try that. And lastly, I think we need to consider the possibility of, as we are engaging in a more visible activity among our organizations, among this coalition, we should consider, I think, organizing a massive anti-war march for April 4th, 2018, in order to take the initiative in building this anti-war movement here in this country.
Our next panelist is Bernadette Ellorin. Bernadette is the current chairperson of the U.S. chapter of Bagong, I'm not going to pronounce it, Bayan USA, an anti-imperialist alliance of 20 Filipino organizations in the U.S. struggling for genuine sovereignty and democracy in the Philippines, and for the rights and welfare of Filipinos in the U.S. and the diaspora. Bernadette.
Thank you and good morning. I think history is our best teacher and has already answered the question for us in many ways. I want to draw on two historical events that I want us to draw lessons from in terms of how do we build an effective anti-war, peace and justice movement. And those two events are, number one, in the turn of the 19th century, during the Philippine-American War, when black soldiers were in the Philippines, after being forced to fight the genocidal wars against the Native Americans in the United States, they were also taken to the Philippines to kill Filipinos on behalf of U.S. imperialist war of aggression for conquest. And it was when David Fagan, a black soldier who was there, learned that their guns were put in at the wrong target. So the defection of David Fagan, and therefore the defection of other black soldiers in the Philippines during that time, I think is something important for us to take note of. The fact that David Fagan not only defected, became the most wanted man in the United States, and also became revered as a great commander in the Philippine Revolutionary Army. The second event that I want us to take note of is 100 years ago, the Great October Revolution. The Russian proletariat was victorious in overthrowing the Tsarist regime in Russia. These two events, I think, give us valuable lessons on how to build an effective peace movement here in the US and around the world. Number one, David Fagan and the experience of the black soldiers in the Philippines show us the need for black leadership, the need for black leadership in the peace and justice movement, the immediacy of oppressed peoples in understanding the need for solidarity, the need for more oppressed peoples to be, in these conferences, it directly impacted people because the clarity is there. The clarity is there with people-to-people solidarity. It's not so clear right now. It's not as clear as it was back then. I think the October Revolution teaches us the historical role of proletarian leadership, the need for workers to be in the anti-war movement and to be leading the anti-war movement as the most exploited class under the stage of imperialism. I also think that the October Revolution teaches us that peace will require armed struggle. Because the peace we want is not the peace of the graveyard. We want the peace of the living, those living with dignity, those living with justice, those living with sovereignty. We don't want pacification, we want food on the table. And the powers that be will never voluntarily give up their power. We must take it by force. The October Revolution also teaches us the alternative of the cause of socialism, which is now more relevant more than ever under the current stage of the current crisis. That being said, the global people-to-people solidarity, internationalism, the need for black leadership, the need for proletarian leadership, working class leadership, and I will even go as far as to say youth leadership. We need young people in the anti-war movement because they are the most productive force, and I mean young workers. I don't necessarily mean students. I mean young workers. We need young workers in this movement. This is about building, and we have to build the anti-war movement, and in particular UNAC, towards this direction. We need these leaders in our ranks and in our leadership. I want to, in addition to having the privilege of being a part of the UNAC Administrative Committee, I'm also in the leadership of the International League of People Struggle. So some of you may have gotten this pamphlet. I want to invite you all to UNAC's workshop at this conference in Toronto, August 5 to 7. The reason why it's in Toronto is because the people who are invited here and who will be speaking here are people who are banned from entering the US. And so we thought that Toronto is close enough for people to be able to still go from the US. So UNAC is endorsing this conference. UNAC will be on neo-fascism and the national security state. It's really important that the peoples around the world take advantage of these opportunities, the international gatherings, to have people-to-people connections so that we know on the ground, because we're surrounded by so much propaganda and the superstructure of the bourgeois of the bourgeoisie. We need to combat that with direct people-to-people connections, because our education system isn't going to provide that for us. Our mass media is not going to provide us with any clarity on what's actually happening on the ground. So we need to make the effort to meet these people around the world, wherever they gather, and talk to them, and really build impacted people's people-to-people solidarity. So that being said, I agree with Brother Ajamu. The crisis, in the first place, imperialism exists, so the resistance will be around for a long time. We will be victorious. This is not a system that is gone berserk. This is not a system that needs to be reined in. This is a system that is developing exactly the way Lenin said it was developed. So that being said, we know what is to be done, and the conditions are ripe. The objective conditions are ripe. The question is, are the subjective forces ready to take advantage of it? And I think we're all here because we know that we are. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Tamara Hansen. She's a founding member of the Mobilization Against War and Occupation in Vancouver, Canada. She's the coordinator of Vancouver Communities in Solidarity with Cuba, author of 5 Decades of the Cuban Revolution, The Challenges of an Unwavering Leadership, and member of the editorial board of the Fire This Time newspaper.
All right, good morning, everyone. What an amazing weekend we've had so far. I want to thank the United National AntiWar Coalition for organizing a great conference this weekend. It's been an honor to join united with all of you to learn from each other, to come up with ways we can work together, and I hope that we will continue after today to support each other's initiatives and build a more unified and powerful anti-war movement in the United States, in Canada, and of course, eventually, all around the world. Again, my name is Tamara Hansen, and I'm the founding organizer with Mobilization Against War and Occupation in Vancouver, Canada, and I'm also on the editorial board of the Fire This Time newspaper. For us, the world today is defined by an ongoing and expanding US-led wars and occupations. US sanctions, bombing, invasion, covert military action, and the reality of life for the majority of the people on this planet. As I mentioned in Mao, we call this the new era of war and occupation. As activists, organizers, and human-loving people gathered here at this conference, we need to confront this vicious campaign by US imperialism and its allies. From their 2001 invasion of Afghanistan to their 2003 war in Iraq, we have witnessed over 15 years of brutal wars and occupations around the globe. This, of course, has included the war at home in the form of racist and Islamophobic attacks, austerity measures, and attacks on our civil and democratic rights. What I want to discuss a bit this morning is the political dynamics between oppressed and oppressor in terms of the relationship of forces within our tasks and perspectives to confront this new era of war and occupation. Of course, in 8 minutes, I can only do so much, but at least I'll put forward a few of our ideas and what we're working on in Vancouver and how we think that we can work together in the future across borders to put an end to war. Indeed, we have done a superb job, I think, this weekend altogether to bring together many good ideas and analysis based on our own experiences and outlooks. And this makes my presentation much easier. One of the great aspects of the UNAC conference has been the discussion on the issues of combining this concept of the war at home and the war abroad. But for us, the context also has to be that we are in a very specific historical circumstance, this new era of war and occupation. This is a long epoch in that imperialists are seeking a very direct, brutal, bloody, and military confrontations. One of our brothers yesterday described the militarization of the police. And we could also talk about this new era of war and occupation as being militarization at home and militarization abroad. But it is not possible anymore to separate these two from each other. While struggling against war at home is directed and targeted at the ruling capitalist class here, the struggle against wars and occupations abroad also attacks the ruling class and capitalist class at home. The difference is that, as we said 10 years ago, this is a long historic period that imperialists will shed the blood of millions of people. And we've already seen them beginning this over the last 15 years especially, to bring some partial solution to their capitalist economic crisis, overproduction, and their battle amongst themselves for who will dominate the market. Speaking for today, we see a convergence of these two struggles rather than a divergence, which is the intensification of the war at home and war abroad. It could be compared to a pair of scissors, which are coming together, and meaning that this intensification of imperialist war and occupation means that oppressed people here in the United States and also in Canada and the world abroad, our struggles are coming together. And so this calls for more united action and more unity in our struggle. Today, more than ever before in history, the concept of unity has been an issue of discussion and necessity. To develop a correct vision and perspective, that scope of our struggle, well, it is responding to an attack of the ruling class at home, and more is becoming important to participate in international struggles in building a strong and effective international movement against war and occupation for self-determination of oppressed nations at home and abroad. In Vancouver, for the last 10 years, every month we've been organizing rallies, petition campaigns, forums, conferences, and festivals in order to bring these struggles to people in our city, to raise the issue of war and occupation in their daily lives. And any of these actions are a part of keeping the fire alive within our anti-war organizers, but also bringing it to new communities, these ideas about war and occupation. But our struggle is not just political in nature. It is absolutely economical as well. Fighting for the rights of workers and oppressed people, fighting against war and occupation, puts the masses abroad in a better position against their ruling classes and US imperialism and its allies. Can you imagine if workers in the Philippines, Indonesia, Bangladesh, Namibia, China, India, Morocco, Congo, Guatemala, and Colombia, just to name a few, were all being paid justly and fairly, closely to workers in the United States or Canada? Can you imagine how much life would change here in the United States? How much life would change for people in imperialist countries? It opens immediately the struggle of working and oppressed people. And so within even just that simple concept, we can see that we are connected by way of war, occupation, and economy. The class struggle in the world today is more connected than ever before, and it has opened a great opportunity for us to mobilize, rearrange, and coordinate against imperialism and capitalism. We need to move from this new sense of unity towards creating that in action and organization in building united fronts. It's time for us to work together to tackle the daily living struggles of people in the United States, Canada, and around the world, connecting issues that folks can connect to, whether it's the environment, racism, or anti-austerity measures, to war and occupation. And this has been a great concept we've discussed at this conference this weekend. To do this, in Vancouver, we talk about the 3 C's: consistency, creativity, and coordination. And these 3 C's are things that we want everybody in the anti-war movement to embrace as kind of our mantra for moving ahead. How can we be more consistent? The ruling class is consistent, we have to be consistent too. How can we be creative in our message and bringing it to working people? And how can we be more united? More international days of action, more unity in the anti-war movement. Coming together is the best way to unite and to win, because it puts us in a position to have a clear view and strategy to organize our struggles, and also bring strength to building a combat organization. An organization is the essence and foundation of any struggle's ability to win. We can learn, for example, yesterday from our message from our sister in Poland, in their struggle for abortion rights, how women came together in a united front against their ruling class and its measures against the right to abortion. And it is with these united fronts that we can go forward to establish a better world. I believe this is our fight to win. We just have to come together and make it happen. United, we will win. Venceremos.
Our next speaker is noted Glen Ford, is executive editor of the Black Agenda Report, and he co-founded that with Bruce Dixon and Margaret Kimberly, who is attending here. A lifelong activist, Ford has worked as a broadcast and print journalist since 1970. Glen.
Power to the people. Power to the people. Is this microphone on? No, it's not. Power to the microphone. The title of this panel, Building a More Powerful Movement for Justice and Peace, seems to require that the presenter offer something powerful and heavy and transformational. And if I had anything so awesome to offer, I would have published it already, and the reorganization of the movement would be well underway by now. But I don't have anything to offer except suggestions which would be tested in the real world of struggle. That world is always in motion, and we must constantly educate ourselves and educate our comrades, and then test what we think we have learned in action, in practice. We have to have the discipline and humbleness to seek the truth about the actual human, material, and social conditions in the arenas in which we work and which we seek to work. The discipline of truth-telling is a very difficult one, which is why the great revolutionary Amilcar Cabral admonished us to tell no lies and claim no easy victories. But the reason that Cabral's advice is so important is not because the truth will set you free, because it will not set you free, not by itself. However, without disciplined search for the truth, without an analysis of the actual conditions that you confront, you will never know what time it is. And if you don't know what time it is, you will never seize the time and act decisively and effectively to take advantage of the opportunities as they present themselves. And that's the reason that a people's movement must not tell lies and must not suppress inconvenient truths. And that's what sets UNAC apart from other organizations like the one that has the acronym that some of us mock, United for Peanut Butter and Jelly. I think that UNAC is sincerely seeking the truth so that it can find or create the opportunities to seize the time, to bring power to the people, and to remove the cause of war, which is mainly, in this epoch, U.S. imperialism. The alternative is socialism. It's not peanut butter and jelly. And you got to be clear on that. And I think most of us at UNAC are clear on that. And that's why our sister Charo Mina Rojas from Colombia told us in her workshop yesterday that the best thing that the people of the United States can do for the people of her besieged country is to fight capitalism.
Right.
In this period of capitalist dissolution, the objective conditions are on our side. We can prevent barbarism or nuclear annihilation, but only if we effectively intervene by seizing the time. That is the meaning of seizing the time. So we should be in a permanent learning process. But what have we learned recently? We learned, courtesy of Donald Trump during the campaign, that his constituency, which consists of a majority of white people in this country, is a lot less favorable to a permanent U.S. state of war against the world than many of us thought. They didn't move 1 inch away from Trump when he repeatedly made noises about normalizing relations with Russia and about ending U.S. regime change policies. And that means, I think, that the constituency for U.S. imperialism is a lot softer than many of us previously thought. Or at least it means that these middle Americans, as they call themselves, these middle American white folks, care a lot more about race than they do about U.S. military domination of the world, which could mean that we have the same white supremacist problem that we've always had, but that the prospects for anti-war work in middle America are much better than we previously thought, and I think that's quite important. Certainly, the War Party got that message, which is the main reason that they are working their anti-Russian frenzy like maniacs. They are in a panic, desperate to maintain the momentum of their 6-year-long military offensive, which is centered in Syria. But how is the anti-war movement responding to those political lessons learned about the Trump constituency, about their openness to détente with Russia? We also learned, after 8 years of Barack Obama, that black people's historical opposition to U.S. military adventures abroad can and was dramatically subverted by black folks' identification with imperial power in the hands of a black person in the White House. We expected as much before he got elected, and Obama proved that our expectations were correct. We now see the spectacle of black people venting their rage against Trump by joining in the Democratic Party's crusade against the Russians. We see rank and file black folks saying things that they really don't mean about Russia. They transfer their righteous hatred of Trump to Vladimir Putin. But Obama had already dented the historical black opposition to U.S. imperialism. And the black misleadership class now competes with their fellow Democrats in villainizing Vladimir Putin. This is a huge problem for the new Black Alliance for Peace and for the anti-war movement as a whole. It means, for one thing, that we must wage a ferocious struggle against the established black political class, which is now almost universally servile to the war party. But that is what, in fact, called forth the Black Alliance for Peace. And even if the formation of that alliance is late, we know that Brother Ajamu Baraka knows what time it is. Power to the people.
Our next speaker is also a journalist and radio host, David Swanson. He's director of worldbeyondwar.org and campaign coordinator for rootsaction.org. Swanson's books include War is a Lie. He blogs and hosts Talk Nation Radio. And he's been a nominee for the Nobel Peace Prize in numerous years. Welcome, David.
Thank you, Marilyn. I think a means of unifying greater activism that we don't pay enough attention to lies in developing a focus on complete and total war abolition. Elimination of all weapons, all militaries, all bases, all aircraft carriers, all missiles, all armed drones, all generals, all colonels, and if necessary, all senators from Arizona. Why war abolition? I'll give you the top 10 reasons. Number one, it actually makes coherent sense. The reasonable position of opposing some wars and cheering for others, but cheering for the troops even in the bad wars, doesn't attract a lot of energy because it doesn't make any sense. Jeremy Corbyn just won votes, as Glenn just noted that Trump didn't lose votes, by making the argument that wars generate terrorism. They are counterproductive on their own terms. They endanger us rather than protecting us. They need to be replaced with diplomacy, aid, cooperation, the rule of law, the tools of nonviolence, the skills of de-escalation of conflict. Claiming that wars are sort of good but shouldn't be overdone makes no sense at all. What is the point if not to win them? And if wars make murder okay, why is torture so unacceptable? If bombs dropped by piloted planes are okay, what's wrong with drones? If anthrax is barbaric, why are white phosphorus and napalm so civilized? And if we are going to use war to end all wars, this has been failing for 100 years now, and pushing that idea on leftists reinforces it for everyone. None of this makes any sense, which is one reason the top killer of U.S. troops is suicide. You know how to properly love troops. End all war and give them life options that don't make them want to kill themselves. Number two, nuclear apocalypse is a growing danger on a par with climate chaos, and it will continue to grow unless war abolition succeeds. Number three, the biggest destroyer of water, air, land, and atmosphere that we have is militarism. It is war or this planet. It is time to choose. Number four, war kills first and foremost by removing resources from where they are needed, including from famines and disease epidemics created by war. Any activism that seeks funding for any human or environmental needs has to look to ending war. It is where all the money is. More money every single year than could be taken once and only once from the billionaires. Number five, war creates secrecy, surveillance, classification of public business, warrantless spying on activists, patriotic lying, and illegal actions by secret agencies. Number six, war militarizes local police, making the public into an enemy. Number seven, war fuels, just as it is fueled by, racism, sexism, bigotry, hatred, and domestic violence. It teaches people to solve problems by shooting guns. Number eight, war divides humanity at a time when we must unite on major projects if we are going to survive, never mind prosper. Number 9, a movement to abolish all war, all weapons, and all atrocities that flow out of war can unite opponents of the crimes of one government or group with the opponents of the crimes of another. Without equating all crimes with each other, we can unite as opponents of war rather than of each other, as people rather than representatives of governments. Number 10, war is the primary thing this society does. It sucks down the majority of federal discretionary spending. Its promotion permeates our culture. It is the very foundation of the belief that ends can justify evil means. Taking on the myths that sell us war as necessary or inevitable or glorious is an ideal way of opening our minds to rethinking what we are doing on and to this little planet. So I have sat through speeches here at this conference where I have been told that we need violence. Studies of the past century of the use of violence and nonviolence in resistance to tyranny domestically and occupations have found that primarily nonviolent campaigns have succeeded over twice as many times. You have over twice the chance of success, and those successes are almost universally far longer lasting than the successes you get from the use of violence. So you can prefer violence, but it's not a strategic preference. It's not a wise preference. It's not resorting to a stronger tool. It's resorting to a weaker tool. You are not going to build a movement against war by encouraging war. You are not going to defeat the greatest purveyor of violence on earth, the United States government, by swearing your loyalty to other corrupt governments. You are not going to avoid nuclear apocalypse without disarmament. You are not going to create a better 21st century using 19th century ideas and ideologies. You are not going to create the coalition that Ajamu said we need to create by mocking those activists closest to us, and without showing people that we are on their side and that the enemy is not any group of human beings, but it is the evil, outdated, obsolescent, destructive, immoral institution of war itself. That's our enemy. Let's defeat it.
Our next speaker is Sara Flounders, co-director of the International Action Center, editor and co-author of 10 books, and a regular writer for Workers' World newspaper. She's also a member of UNAC's administrative committee, a coordinator of the Hands Off Syria Coalition, and a board member for the National Coalition to Protect Civil Freedoms. Sarah.
This is a great crowded stage up here. It's wonderful. You know, each UNAC conference has been different, really different. And this is what I'm sort of looking at, thinking about, because we go a step further in building a kind of unity in the movement. We can all say we need it, but it doesn't just happen. Now, I'm glad that Marilyn opened this morning describing the founding UNAC conference, maybe the most contentious. There was a big divide right from the start. Do we include Palestine as a central demand? Do we talk about all the US wars? And it continued in the next conference, how to look at Syria and Libya in the midst of demonization and enormous war propaganda. And there would be folks that say, let's just deal with Iraq and Afghanistan. Why make this complicated? It was how to also consciously take on the demonization of Muslim people in the US. I think the second conference, there were several hundred Muslim delegates that came from all different organizations. We had a conference 2 years ago in New Jersey. People's Organization for Progress played a big role in Newark. So it's so good that Larry Hamm is here today. Action 21 and immigrant organizations, community organizers. So this gathering in Richmond, and I really think we should thank in a big way Anna Edwards, Phil Wilayto, the Virginia Defenders, because they've turned themselves inside out for more than 6 months. Probably the only thing they want to do at this point is spend a few days at the beach or, or sleeping. But I raise all this gathering. There's representatives of organizations that are really engaged in confrontation with the U.S. empire long term, and acting together without a sharp fight, with a lot of unity and respect. It's made for a huge stage again and again, hearing from many different voices. We need to actually have, it's important, this open session that we're going to have right after this, because we need to be hearing more from all those who came. But here's our big problem. U.S. wars are more and more unpredictable. No one here could even say where and what's happening tomorrow. Is there a coup against Venezuela that's like really imminent? Is it a war move on Iran, which sure looks like how hot things are in the Gulf? And the Saudi moves on Qatar. And they just sent another 4,000 troops to Afghanistan. Who votes on that? It doesn't even happen with a discussion. It's like a little sideline in the newspaper. Certainly the war in Syria, it's hotter than ever. We got to bring in Yemen. If ever the weapon of famine consciously used, complete blockade imposed by the US Navy. Doesn't just happen. And sharper confrontation with both Russia and China. Not a day goes by, you can't open up, you can't look at any news without seeing a level of demonization on Russia and China. Major confrontations being planned. Look at the South China Sea. So, linking the anti-war movement and all these different issues together and saying we're standing up on all of them, and more consciously to the war here at home. Now, there's almost no support for any U.S. war. And I think Glen raised that so clearly that even Trump, he had to appeal on an anti-war basis. How shocking is that? And then the Democrats in fighting him have jumped way to the right. They're going to make it all about Russia. But every poll now, 2/3, 3/4 sometimes, against any U.S. troop commitment anywhere.
Right.
But the role of demonization in the media is to push it beyond debate. This isn't anything to be discussed. Action has to be taken. Their force is so evil that no discussion is allowed. Now, obviously, they know very well, they're the ones doing the polls again and again, that there's no support for their wars. But it means every politician says, these are the lines of discussion, and you'd better not step over it. Now, UNAC needs to constantly change if it's going to grow. Really does. We have to be looking at this all the time. Definitely more people of color, more actively involved and engaged. more of the immigrant activists, more of the Muslim participation, and definitely the youth who are in so many struggles need to be represented in a major way. And it won't happen without really thinking how to do this. So we have a big challenge ahead of us. But we do have a bare bones that's pretty important because we've come through some real struggles, fought it out internally, within the administrative committee, a larger coordinating committee. Every one of these statements, you can look them up, they're important, whether it's on Venezuela or Syria or Libya or the war here at home, was a real internal discussion. And unity is never easy. I have a minute left, okay. UNAC is several left parties who've learned how to cooperate and share space, coming from very different ideological, theoretical directions. And it's quite a number of independent activists who also come from different political currents, both in the class struggle here in the US and from struggles around the world. But it is interesting, I think almost all the forces now in UNAC are consciously anti-capitalist and anti-imperialist. But they're coming at it from different directions, so you can never just assume, oh, we all agree on this. No, you gotta go through it, step by step sometimes. Now, what can we expect? We don't know what war. What can we expect? We can expect crisis, capitalist crisis, where the only diversion is war. We're looking at a whole society that is militarized globally, but right here with prisons and police on a scale that is beyond comprehension, and secret agencies. So we can expect real crises, but there is a level of resistance that we have to look at and participate in even more deeply. There's not a day when there aren't major demonstrations around the country. It's pretty amazing, but it doesn't get reflected in the media. So let me just end by saying we have this bare bones, we have unity, we have different forces that have come together that are determined to resist and stay in it from the long haul. And we need to listen to each other more. We need to involve new voices, because that's easier to do when you have a basis of unity. When you're all over the place, who's reaching where? There's a lot of suspicion. But there's a lot of cohesion right now in UNAC, and that is a big, big positive. So let's hear each other, let's listen to each other more. Everyone who's here, you gotta think how to more actively involve and move forward. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Phil Wilayto. I think everyone knows Phil. He's a co-founder of the Virginia Defenders for Freedom, Justice, and Equality. He's editor of the Virginia Defender newspaper, author of books on Iran, the 1989 Pittston coal strike, and the right-wing Bradley Foundation. He's the coordinator of UNAC's Odessa Solidarity Campaign, a member of the administrative committee, and he and his wife Anna are the main organizers of this conference today. Let's give them a hand. And our gratitude.
So if I fall asleep in the middle of this talk, it'll be okay, right? I want to talk about strategy, and kind of building on a piece that I wrote some time ago for a more general audience. So it started out with a discussion about how we are living in a period of capitalist crisis and going through the different financial aspects of that, but also on the personal level, how people are hurting. The average person carries $7,500 worth of debt. 60% of workers have only their Social Security to look forward to for retirement, and 40% of all workers begin to collect that Social Security at the age of 62, which is the lowest level. So it's a crisis, and meanwhile, we've always known that the money that's necessary for people's needs here at home is being squandered in wars abroad. But it's accelerating at a tremendous pace under Trump, or at least he wants to accelerate it. And this brings us to the question of strategy. We have to get ready. And by that, and I don't usually write out my talks, but I really wanted to do it this time because we're in a critical situation. We don't have all the time in the world to get ourselves together. The scientists tell us we maybe have 30 years. So I'm 68, my mom's 98, and I don't want to be running away from this tsunami with my walker when we get to that point. And that's not an ageist comment because I'm up there. So we have to get ready. And what I mean by that is we have to recognize our role as revolutionaries. We don't make the revolution ourselves. We educate the working class and oppressed communities about the historic role they can play, and we can help provide some direction to the struggle. Right now, the progressive forces in the U.S. are not in a position to provide the leadership that is so desperately needed. We are hardly a factor in today's political struggles. And the anti-war movement, which used to be able to mobilize hundreds of thousands against wars and threats of war, hasn't been able to mount a major anti-war protest in years. I've been thinking for a long time that the anti-war movement in the U.S., to survive and grow, has to ground itself in the class and anti-oppression struggles of people here in the United States. That is why the Defenders pushed in 2015 for UNAC to adopt as its conference theme, "Stop the Wars at Home and Abroad." We did the same thing this year, but since we had agreed to take on organizing the conference, we're in a position to promote that concept more strongly. The result has been a conference focused half on domestic issues and half on international ones, with the largest participation of Black leadership in UNAC history. Now what is needed is to develop a strategic plan for the multinational working class and oppressed communities that offers a realistic alternative to the neoliberalism of the Democrats and the jingoistic nationalist populism of the Trump forces. And we need to do that, or we risk the rise of a truly fascist movement. This is the lesson of the recent past in Eastern Europe. In my opinion, we need two things: a positive program and a strategic plan of action. A program has to be more than just a list of what we are against. It has to appeal to workers on a class basis. It has to do this because it is right, but also because it counters the appeal of the nationalist populists. Trump is proposing 6 months parental leave for new parents, both men and women. This is similar to what our Polish comrade Eva Grzuska explained in her talk yesterday, how the right-wing Law and Justice Party came to power by offering some real relief to Polish workers suffering the effects of the neoliberalism of the previous government. If we leave these class demands to the ultra-right, we lose. We should be demanding jobs or income for now, for all. Free and universal education through the university level, free universal health care, 8 or 10 weeks paid parental leave, a strengthening of Social Security and support for long-term nursing care, and more. But at the same time, our program must include demands that address the special oppressions of people of color, women, the LGBTQ community, immigrants, Muslims, prisoners, and more. And our movement must be anchored in the oppressed communities of the working class, not merely as objects of solidarity, but as a core part of our leadership. Exactly. We are saying to white workers, join our movement and we will fight for you, but only if you agree to fight against the oppression of all other workers. We won't win over all white workers, but we will win over the best, and we will split the ranks of the potential opposition. In addition to a positive program, we need a strategic plan. We are up against the most powerful enemy in world history. What are its strengths, its weaknesses? In our struggle here in Richmond to stop the previous mayor and corporate Richmond from building a baseball stadium on the sacred ground of Shackle Bottom, we learned that we could win if we could figure out the limit of what our opponents were willing to pay and get to get their stadium, which in essence was a real estate deal. What was their threshold of pain, and how could we increase their pain to that level? How could we counter and check their initiatives while staying 3 steps ahead with our own? That was what enabled us to work out a strategy that led this protracted community struggle to victory. Today, there is no baseball stadium in Shockoe Bottom, but there is a recognized African burial ground where a state-owned parking lot used to be. This is the same approach we took with our solidarity work with the anti-fascist movement in Odessa, Ukraine. How could we influence the Ukrainian government to hold back the fascist organizations physically attacking the Council of Mothers of May 2? Where was that government's vulnerability? It was their phony attempt to project a democratic facade to the world in order not to jeopardize massive loans from Western banks and institutions. So we organized 2 international campaigns that succeeded in getting the attention of the U.S. State Department and the right-wing government in Kiev. The first was the campaign to bring support to the 2nd anniversary memorial held in Odessa on May 2nd of last year, an effort that included sending a delegation of 3 UNAC representatives to stand with the courageous people of Odessa against the fascists and forces of state oppression. The April 10 International Day of Solidarity with the people of Odessa saw coordinated actions in 20 cities in 13 countries, and we've been told by the Council of Mothers that both initiatives were helpful in providing some modicum of protection for them in a very difficult situation. On the national level, what is the threshold of pain beyond which the ruling class is not at this time willing to go? It obviously is not only protests, as important as protests are as a tool to building our movement. It's economics. There is a limit to the amount of financial loss the ruling class is willing to absorb in struggles that are short of revolution. One of the most dynamic protest movements we have seen in recent years has been the Moral Mondays movement that began in North Carolina and was able to bring out as many as 10,000 protesters on a single day. Over the course of a year, more than 1,000 people were arrested in civil disobedience actions. It was a magnificent display of unity, determination, courage, and mass mobilization. But in the end, nothing was won. No reactionary legislation was stopped. It was a splendid protest movement that appealed to the moral conscience of an enemy that has no moral conscience. It wasn't until first entertainers, then sports businesses, then major corporations began boycotting North Carolina over the trans bathroom bill that some progress was made. The state began to feel real economic losses, and that had an effect. We don't have the economic clout of rich corporations, but we do have the ability to stop the production of goods and services, distribution, transportation, communication, and more. We can engage in political strikes that move more and more in the direction of a national general strike. And the working class is already beginning to take the first steps in that direction. The Day Without Immigrants Action in 2006, the Fight for 15 movement, the political strikes on the West Coast. These are examples of real political strikes with economic consequences. If we could bring these forces together, we can build on these concrete actions, and we might have a chance to move beyond education and protest to real economic struggle against the ruling class. A day of no work, no school, no shopping. A day when we all gather in the financial districts across the country and shut them down. This happens in other countries. We can do it here. We just need to collect our forces, build our alliances, and make it happen. Please join us on the short walk to Shockoe Bottom later today.
We have one last speaker for this panel, and then we move into the next section, which I'll review again. The last speaker is Larry Hamm. Larry is an activist and founder of POP, People's Organization for Progress in New Jersey, a grassroots organization working for racial, social, and economic justice and peace. Larry Hamm.
Good morning. Power to the people.
Power to the people.
First of all, let's give a hand to all of these panelists, these great panelists we've had this morning. They have really cleaned the plate. There's nothing else to say. First of all, let me just say that I'm so glad to be here once again for the UNAC conference. The People's Organization for Progress considers itself to be a member of UNAC, and we are encouraging other organizations at the local level to join UNAC, because today, more than ever before, we need a peace movement. The threat of war, wars abroad, and world war is greater than it's ever been. But the peace movement will not rise to the level that it needs to rise unless it is closely and directly connected to the Black liberation struggle in the United States of America. And let me say this, the Black liberation movement will not be able to achieve its aims and goals unless we are connected to the peace movement and the other movements that exist here in the United States of America. And it is this dialectic that has bedeviled us for decades and continues to bedevil us. And it is so important that somehow we struggle to navigate this contradiction and overcome the differences that have kept our people's movements apart. At critical times, we've come together, and at those times, we've achieved success, but we have not been able to build that glue to hold us together long enough so that we could, in fact, reach not just a quantitative change in our movement, but a qualitative change also. The People's Organization for Progress, since it was founded, and I'm proud to say that this August will be the 34th anniversary of our grassroots organization. From the time that we were founded, we've always seen ourselves as part of the anti-imperialist and anti-capitalist movement, and the struggle for peace was one of our original 10 aims and purposes. We realized this from the beginning. But here we are now, 34 years later, still talking about this issue. Many things have been talked about during this panel, but one of the things I feel that I have to raise is that just this week, the officer that murdered in broad daylight, in cold blood, the officer that killed Philando Castile was found not guilty. This is just one more of a long line of police murders that have taken place in this country. Tomorrow, the People's Organization for Progress will have not a protest, but will have our 73rd consecutive protest in front of the federal building in Newark, New Jersey, to demand an end to police brutality. And we believe that, as one of the previous, I believe our sister from Canada said, consistency is key. No one protest in 1 week, in 1 year is not going to do it. But we have to assail the doors of oppression with the battering ram of protest until those doors are broken down. And if it takes 73 weeks or 730 weeks, We have to commit ourselves to that. This is so important that we link these two struggles. This year will mark the 50th anniversary of the Newark Rebellion.
Yes.
We don't say Newark riots. It wasn't a riot. The police could have put down a riot. A riot is something that happens after a soccer game. This wasn't a riot. You don't have martial law declared during a riot. Martial law and troops are brought in when the people are in rebellion. And in the United States, between 1960 and 1972, there were more than 1,000 urban uprisings in the United States. And African Americans have continued. There has not been one decade in the 20th century into the 21st century where we haven't seen an uprising from African Americans, primarily in response to police brutality. Since Michael Brown was killed in Ferguson, more than 2,500 people have been killed by police. In 2015, 1,136 people killed. In 2016, over 1,000 people killed. And not just in the streets, but also behind prison walls. Correction officers have killed more than 600 black people in our prisons.
Right, right.
This is not police brutality. This is police terror and murder that is going on across the United States of America. And the peace movement, see, it's one thing to invite black people to a conference. It's one thing to invite prominent black authors and writers and speakers to speak at gatherings. But the real question is, what happens at the local level when these conferences are over? I'm going to tell you what happened. Black people demonstrate against police brutality, and the white people who demonstrate for peace don't show up at those demonstrations, and that practice has to come to an end, brothers and sisters. And likewise, I say to my black comrades here in this room, we can't look at the peace movement as a white thing. It's a people's thing. If war destroys everybody, and I get this in my community, well, we're not going to that. That's the white people's thing. No. If you're a revolutionary, you got to fight on all fronts. And the front for peace is as important as the struggle against police brutality. We have to have multi-dimensional thinking. We can't have unidimensional thinking or bidimensional thinking. This is a multi-dimensional system that oppresses us in a myriad of ways, and we must have strategies and tactics that address all of those aspects. This is so important, brothers and sisters. So those of you who are in the area tomorrow, if you can come and join us in front of the Federal Building in Newark, please do so. The day after that is Juneteenth. June 19th, when black people in Galveston, Texas learned 2 years after it had been issued, learned of the Emancipation Proclamation. And, you know, we can't get away from history. We live forever in the vortex of history. History is swirling all around us. Just a year ago, a sister climbed up and took down the Confederate flag, and people are taking down Confederate monuments all over the country. But it's not enough just to take down the Confederate flag and take down Confederate monuments. What about the struggle for reparations for African Americans whose ancestors were enslaved in the United States for 245 years? On Saturday, June the 24th, the People's Organization for Progress is calling a march for reparations for African Americans. That march is going to start at 12 noon at the Lincoln Monument in Newark, New Jersey. And we invite everybody to be there. Everybody who can be there, please be there. But if you can't be there, support the struggle for reparations wherever it is going on in your community. See, we don't just have to run to Washington, D.C. We should be having demonstrations of thousands in the towns and cities that we live in all across the United States of America. All across the United States of America. So I end with this. Let us keep struggling, but let us struggle to find ways to bring our movements together, not just at the conference, but bring these movements together in the streets. And I come out of, I'm going to end with this, I come out of the Black Liberation Movement. I'm a child of the Black Power movement. I grew up, I'm a witness to the rebellion in Newark of 1967. But I understand this, that we need a Black Liberation Movement. But I also understand that a Black Liberation Movement by itself is not going to bring down this capitalist and imperialist system. A women's movement by itself is not going to do it. A peace movement by itself is not going to do it. A gay movement by itself is not going to do it. Ultimately, we must build a people's movement that unites all of those movements to bring about the fundamental transformation of this system. Power to the people. Thank you very much, brothers and sisters.
Thank you. Larry really wrapped it up and brought together, I think, all of the things that people have been saying for this weekend. Let's give everybody on the panel, first of all, a really big hand. I think this is a perfect way to start the work that we're doing today, and which wraps up and builds on what we've been talking about for the last 2 days. So I'm going to review the schedule for today and how we're going to proceed, and I think we're going to start with a break first, 10 minutes, and then proceed. We've heard about all the struggles that are going on, all the kinds of work and activism and fights and repression that's been going on and wars for the last 2 days. Now we have to not just walk out and say, well, I learned a lot and I heard some great speeches, but we have to be able to say, we have a plan, we have strategies, we have actions that we can take, and that we can work together, which I think has been a theme that's been raised over and over, that there is no separation between the war in Syria and the wars at home. What we need to do is, we've been talking, people up here have been talking to you and with you, but what we need to do today is to, when we reconvene, is to open it up for general discussion, to hear from everyone, to hear about what your thoughts are, what your ideas are for how we go forward. And I think it's also clear that what we have to do is build UNAC as part of that going forward, because that is a collaboration of unity between all of these different forces that we've been talking about and all the work that people are doing in their own areas. So that will be the discussion. There will be an action proposal from UNAC that will be distributed soon, I hope. And then we're going to have that discussion. I'm not sure, we'll figure out exactly what the time parameters are when we'll end that. Hopefully, then we'll have lunch, and then we'll wrap up with being able to march to Shockoe Bottom.